It was about, oh gosh, it's long enough ago, I can't really remember how many years ago, but it was several years ago that a friend of mine asked me to officiate his wedding in Cabo. So I took Jill along, and the day after the wedding, we were eating fish tacos in one of the local restaurants downtown, and there was a couple next to us, and we began to strike up a conversation with them. And they'd been down to Cabo several times, and for us it was our first time. And so we said, well, what do you like to do down here? And they said, well, there's this place that very few people know about. It's kind of out of the way, kind of hard to get to. You got to travel down dirt roads. Your GPS won't work, right? But it's one of the most beautiful spots in all of Mexico. It's called Cabo Pulmo, and it's a 17,000 acre marine sanctuary. You know what a marine sanctuary is? They don't allow you to fish. There's no boats. You can't bring boats in there. So it's very undisturbed, very pristine. But they said it's very hard to get to. It's easy to get lost down these dirt roads, back roads. And I'm like, this sounds amazing. And Jill's like, this sounds dangerous. So we rented a car. Little Mexican car with wheels like the size of donuts on it, and we're about 2 hours into this trip down these dirt roads. And guys, you can relate to this if you've been married for any length of time. I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is a I told you so trip. So we're driving down these roads, and really I'm thinking, we're lost. But then suddenly the road opened up, and in front of us was the most gorgeous beach. And the water was crystal clear. And the fish. Turns out Cabo Pulmo is one of the, if not the best place to snorkel in all of Mexico. We spent the whole day there, didn't see or hear another human soul. I didn't want to leave. It was this hidden gem that very few people had discovered. So, in your Bibles, in the Old Testament, there's this story that is a hidden gem. Not a lot of people know about it. And it's about this guy named Mephibosheth. Now, I have to say that name about 20 times in this sermon, so I'm hoping to get it right each time, but just know, okay? I often pray, just so you know, that God will smooth over the bumpiness of my words. And with a name like Mephibosheth, I need lots of prayer, all right? Just letting you know. So Mephibosheth literally means out of the mouth of shame. In other words, the man's name is associated with shame. This is the guy that nobody wants to be around. This is the guy that nobody thinks about. You'll see it in a bit that he has other conditions that alienate him from people. So for the last several weeks, we've been in this series that we've called 99+1, and it's based off of a story that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 15 about a shepherd who has 99 sheep. One goes missing. He leaves the 99 in pursuit of the one because that one is lost. That one is scared. That one is isolated. That one's in trouble on its own. So the shepherd goes after it, finds it, picks it up, puts it on his shoulders, and carries it back to the safety of the flock. And that's just one of many stories told by Jesus that exposes the heart of God toward those who are far from him. And they are stories of hope, and they are stories about God's grace. If there is one word that defines the Christian life, it is the word grace. Grace is kindness. You can't earn it. You can't repay it. There's nothing you can do to deserve it. It's just given to you. Why? Because God is a God of grace. And so all throughout the Bible, you see these stories of God's grace upon these people. And if you look at the ministry of Jesus, grace is just flowing out of him. One of the ways in which Jesus is described is that he's full of grace and truth. And so tucked away in your Old Testament is this guy named Mephibosheth. And it is perhaps one of, if not, the most beautiful pictures of grace in the entire Old Testament. So let me give you the backstory. His story is told in 2 Samuel. And here's what's happening. There's a king named David. Very, very influential king in Israel's history. Very successful. And at this point in the story, he's at the height of his kingdom. Tragedy will come, but at this point, he's at the height of his kingdom. He is the undisputed king in every weight class. And what's happening is Israel's territory has been expanded tenfold. People love David. It's a time of prosperity. And he pauses. And he begins to reflect on the past and what's gotten him where he is. And this causes him to ask a question. And here's the question. Is there anyone alive? Is there anyone remaining from the former king's household? Now, that's not an uncommon question for kings to ask once they step into positions of authority, once they step into the position of the throne. Why? Because if you want to maintain your throne, you're going to annihilate every prospective rival. And there was a good chance that there could be an heir to the former king, let's say a son or a grandson, who begins to think to himself, you know, that throne should be mine. And then that person leads a revolt or a rebellion, and now there's a threat to your throne. And so kings would ask this question, anybody left alive from the former king's family? It's really a question of revenge, and it's meant to protect his authority. But that's not where David's heart is at. Because David literally asks this question. Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul, that was the former king, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now let's talk about this word kindness, because our English translation of the word doesn't capture the depth and the richness of it. The Hebrew word is chesed, and it describes God's steadfast, committed, loving kindness towards his people. And that's saying a lot. Let me give you the history in a nutshell of God's dealing with his people. God blesses his people. He blesses his people. And what do the people do? Turn their back on God. They rebel. And God says, I'm not letting you go. I'm not letting you go. I'm not going to let you walk away from me. I'm going to show you chesed, my loving kindness. And so David says, is there anyone left in Saul's household that I can show the same love that God has for his people? Can I take that kind of love and show it to someone in the former king's household? Now, why would he want to do that? He tells you why. For Jonathan's sake. So who is this guy Jonathan? Jonathan was actually the former king, King Saul's son. And he and Jonathan were BFFs, right? They were best friends. I mean, Jonathan was very loyal to David. There came to a point when actually Saul was out of his mind because he'd walked away from God. And so when people walk away from God, often what happens is they become angry. They become twisted up inside. And that's exactly where Saul is at. And so Saul threatens to kill David, tries to kill David. But Saul's son comes to David and says, David, listen, I'm your friend, and I want to help you. And actually, in 1 Samuel chapter 20, he declares his loyalty. He says, but should I please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, me, and more also if I do not disclose it to you and send you away that you may go in safety. So he says, I know that my dad is after you, and if I learn of some kind of plot or some kind of plan to attack you, I'm going to let you know. I'm going to forewarn you so that you can escape. And he says, may the Lord be with you, David, as he has been with my father. At one point, King Saul had God's anointing on him, but then Saul got weird, and he too turned his back on God. And God's spirit left Saul. That's when the anger comes in, and he tries to kill David. David says, the way that God's spirit was with my dad in the beginning, that's what I want for you, David. That's what I want for you. And then he says, if I am still alive, and that's a big if, because Jonathan was a warrior. This guy was a soldier, and he knows I could get killed in battle at any point in time. But if I am still alive, David, will you show me show me the chesed love, the steadfast love of the Lord, the same love that God has for his people. Will you show that to me, that I may not die? And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever. For when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. So here's what Jonathan says. He says, look, David, I know that God is with you. I know God's hand is upon you. When all of your enemies are vanquished, will you please not do what other kings do? Will you please not take it out on my family? Will you please spare them? Will you please show my family the same love that God shows towards his people? And David says, Jonathan, because of you and your friendship, I will. And so now David is on the throne. Things are going super well. And he's thinking, I made a promise to my friend Jonathan. You see, Jonathan and Saul have both since died in a battle. And David remembers, I made a promise to my friend Jonathan. I need to fulfill it. So he wants to find out, is there anyone left from Saul's household that I can show God's loving kindness to for my friend Jonathan's sake? And so there's this guy named Ziba, and he's a servant of King Saul. But now that Saul's dead, he's kind of on his own. But he has a lot of inside information. So here's what happens, 2 Samuel chapter 9. Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. And they called him to David. And the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, I am your servant. Like, I'm loyal to you now. You're the new king. I'm loyal to you. And the king said, is there not still someone left of the house of Saul that I may show the kindness of God to him? And Ziba said to the king, yes. Actually, there is. There is. There is still a son of your friend Jonathan. And then what he says next is really interesting. Because, there's a lot of different ways you can describe people. But the description that follows is strange. He says, he is crippled in his feet. It's almost like you can sense Ziba saying, well, king, I hear what you're saying. You want to show God's loving kindness to someone, but that someone is not going to look good in your presence. That someone is not someone that you're going to want in your court. Because you see, he can't walk. And when a guy like that is in the presence of the king, it's not going to look good for you. So, yeah, there is a relative. It's Jonathan's son, but he's crippled in his feet. Now, in chapter 4, we learn what happens to this guy. 2 Samuel chapter 4, how he came to this condition. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. What news is that? There was a battle that took place. Saul and Jonathan have been killed. The king has been killed. His son has been killed. When his nurse hears this news, he took up this child. She takes up this boy, and she flees. She runs. And as she fled in her haste, he fell, and he became lame. This is a tragic accident. She's trying to do a good deed. And by the way, she gets it. She understands how this plays. She knows the game. When a new king comes to power, he's going to put to death any of the former king's relatives. And so she's like, I care about this boy. We got to get out of here. So she picks him up, and we don't get the details, but maybe she trips and falls. Something happens. And now this boy, he can't walk. And his name is Shame. Well, king, that's the one relative to whom you can show kindness. And what happens next is it's just super beautiful, because David never asks, well, how crippled is he? How damaged is he? David doesn't go there. Instead, he says, where is he? Where is he? I made a promise, and I'm going to keep it. See, this man was defined by his condition, and David looks right through it. This man is defined by his place in life, and this man looks right through it. So the king says to Ziba, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at LoDebar. Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at LoDebar. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, grandson of Saul, came to David, and he fell on his face, and he paid homage. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold, I am your servant. And David said to him, do not fear. Don't be afraid. Because I'm here to show you kindness, chesed. Why? For the sake of your father, Jonathan. Mephibosheth is about to receive grace because of what someone else did on his behalf. I'm going to say that again. Mephibosheth is about to receive grace because of what someone did on his behalf. Remember that. Because of your father, Jonathan, I'm showing you kindness. And I'm going to restore to you all the land of Saul, your father. And you're going to eat at my table. Always. And Mephibosheth paid homage and said, who am I? Who am I? What is your servant? That you should show regard for a dead dog such as I. David asks, where is he? And he's told he's in LoDebar. LoDebar literally means no pasture. That's another way of saying it's God-forsaken. It's a Palestinian desert wasteland. Why would a guy be living there? Because you don't want to be found. You don't want to be discovered. A great place to hide from the king is in a God-forsaken wasteland, desert wasteland. And that's where Mephibosheth is. And so when he hears that the king knows where he's at and is coming to see him, he's afraid. That's why the text says he bowed down and he paid homage and he said, I serve you. I serve you. It's also why David says, Mephibosheth, don't fear. Don't fear. Because I'm here to show you kindness. But as you can imagine Mephibosheth's relief, it would be hard for you to imagine what he hears next. Because the king, one of the most powerful men in the world at this time, is telling you, oh, and I'm going to give you all the land that your dad had. This made Mephibosheth instantly super wealthy. Land was everything. Not only that, but he's giving him identity because the land that he's giving Mephibosheth is land in the promised land. It's part of the promised land. And so if you're an Israelite and you had land that was part of the promised land, you know what that meant? You were in the family of God. That was all about identity. So he said, I'm going to give you all that your dad had. I'm going to give you the land, I'm going to give you the wealth, and I'm going to give you an identity. Hey, Mephibosheth, I understand how people see you. I understand how people describe you, but let me give you God's perspective. You're a child of God. And then it gets better. David says, also Mephibosheth, you're going to eat with me. To eat at someone's table was a tremendous honor. It was a gift of hospitality. To eat at the king's table, that was a place of not just the highest honor, but also a place of influence because you're at the king's table. And so all of this, David says, is coming to you as a result of what your father did for you. And Mephibosheth's response, I don't think you know who I am. You see, I'm a dead dog. Now, how many of you have dogs? Some of you love your dogs more than your kids. I get it. Right? To us today, dogs are like really precious creatures. But if you lived at this time and you had a dog running around in your house domesticated, people would think you were completely and totally out of your mind. Back in the day, dogs were wild creatures, and they wreaked havoc, and the sight of a dead dog made people happy. Good. A nuisance. Gone. And Mephibosheth says, that's how I view myself. I'm just like that dead animal that people walk by and don't notice, or if they do notice, they're thinking, oh, well, good, better off that way. That's my life, David. I'm like a dead dog, and you're going to give me a seat at your table. And then the story ends like this. Verse 13, so Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now, he was lame in both his feet. Story ends. And you're kind of like, okay, how many times do we have to hear that he was lame in both of his feet? Like, why do you keep bringing that up in the story? Because that's the point. Back in the day, if you had some physical ailment, sickness, a physical deformity, if you were handicapped, if you had mental illness, back in the day, common belief was that you had done something to make the gods angry, and now you were being punished for it. And by the way, the disciples had this same theology, right? Because in John chapter 9, what happens is they encounter this man who's blind, and they see Jesus, and they see this man, and they think, oh, this is a great opportunity to have our theological questions answered, right? So, Jesus, who sinned? Who did wrong? This man or his parents? Did he do something to bring this blindness on himself, or should we blame his parents? But somebody's to blame. Something bad happens. You did something to deserve it. That was their theology. And Jesus is like, teachable moment. You couldn't be more wrong. Because you see, with God, there are no mistakes. With God, there are no accidents. This man is blind to the glory of God. This man is blind because God wants to do something supernatural. God wants to reveal who he is in a way that would otherwise not be possible without blindness. So, people are thinking about Mephibosheth. What's this guy's problem? What has he done? And it's beautiful because David sees right through this. And that's why this is such a remarkable story of grace. But it's part of a bigger story of God's grace toward you and me. Because you and I are totally unworthy of being at the king's table. We actually are. We're totally unworthy of receiving his kindness. And one of the things that keeps some of us from stepping into God's grace and receiving the fullness of it and really understanding what it is now is the idea that perhaps just maybe, God doesn't have to reach so far to show kindness to me because there's something in me that's just a little bit better than what's in you. That's pride. And what we fail to see, we are Mephibosheth. We are Mephibosheth. And so then there's some of us who are like, oh no, you don't understand, God. I'm just like a dead dog. I totally don't deserve your grace. I don't deserve it. You can't give it to me. See, this is the beautiful thing about grace because it covers both errors in thinking. And Mephibosheth, he gets so much more than what he thought was coming to him. 1 John 3:1, see what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are. Mephibosheth is in this position because of what his father Jonathan did. Let me describe it to you this way. Jesus is a better Jonathan. You know what I mean by that? Jesus is a better Jonathan. So we have this table in front of us that represents the sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus is a better Jonathan. We have this table that represents the fact that Jesus went before us in giving his life. We were transferred from death to life. We were poor. We had nothing. And because of Jesus' sacrifice, now we have everything. We receive grace because of his actions. That's why it's so absurd for any Christian to stand in a place of judgment or to withhold forgiveness. So this morning, I want us to approach this table in a very different way. I want you to picture yourself at King David's dinner table. And so in the room walks these gnarly guys, and they're big and they're bad, and they smell like dirt and blood. And these are David's mighty men, men of renown. These guys have fought in battle. They're extremely courageous. You don't want to mess with these guys, all right? No threats here. They're serious. And they come up to the table, and they take their seat, and they're kind of dusting themselves off, and they put their swords down, and they put their shields down, and they're like, man, what's for dinner? I'm famished. And then this gorgeous-looking guy walks into the room. He's got long hair, and he introduces himself. Hey, how's it going? I'm David's son, Absalom. Nice to meet you. And then there's this beautiful woman that walks in, and she seems very refined, very sophisticated, very put together. And she says, hi, I'm David's daughter, Tamar. It's great to have you with us. And you're like out of your mind. Like, I can't believe I'm at the king's table. And then you hear this. And it's this man on crutches. Lifts himself up. And he sits down in this chair that's been made just for him. And he says, hey guys, I'm sorry I'm late. You know, I just got held up. All right, let's eat. And you're like, oh. This is a table of grace. You don't have to achieve something to be at this table. You don't have to prove your worth to be at this table. This is a beautiful picture of God's love and how God meets you right where you're at. So now I want to take it to the next level. You've been invited to God's dinner party. And there's this gray-haired man, and he's got this staff. And he says, hey, my name is Moses. And next to him is Isaac. And Isaac starts talking to this guy named Abraham. You find out, yeah, that's the same, Isaac and Abraham. And then Isaac's like, hey, Dad, remember the time we went up that mountain and we were going to sacrifice and you didn't? Wow, that was crazy. What a story. And then next to them is there's David. And there's the Apostle Paul. And there's the disciples. And there's you. You're like, wow. You didn't earn it. You don't deserve it. But there's a seat for you. So as we approach the table that signifies Jesus is way better than Jonathan, will you please remember and reflect upon that? That no matter what others might think of you, you might be here today, and maybe it's your first time, and you're here because someone invited you. Can I just tell you, you are deeply loved? That person really cares about you. And an amazing thing happens when you experience, when you understand God's grace, it just flows out of you to other people. It just flows out of you. The more grace you extend to others, the deeper your understanding of grace. So I'm going to pray. Men and women are going to serve us. And as they serve us, the worship team is going to sing a song that it was actually written about Mephibosheth being carried to the table. And in a very real sense, the same is true with you and me. So Father, as we enter into this time, God, would you do as only your Spirit can do? Father, would you help us to see anew and fresh all that you are, all that you do, most importantly, what was done on our behalf, that we receive grace because of the sacrifice that Jesus made. We ask it